more than 35 research articles in national and international journals and critical anthologies. The title of his presentation is Multiculturalism, Concepts and Context. Dr. Bhattacharya, please start.
Well, I hope I am audible as well as visible.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Both audible and visible.
Okay.
Sir,
Okay,
kindly
good
please
afternoon.
repeat your topic again. Repeat the topic kindly.
I will do that. I will do that.
Okay, sir.
Okay,
Thank
good
you.
afternoon, dear colleagues. Uh, this is going to be a discussion. Uh, we are among friends. So, without further ado, let me introduce my topic of discussion for today. Well, I am going to talk about multiculturalism, concepts, and context. First of all, your multiculturalism has been spelled in all caps, in uppercase, and it is hyphenated. Multi plus culture plus al plus ism. I am not going to be comprehensive. I am just going to point out certain concepts and contexts that I find relevant in any study of any study of multiculturalism, and both the strengths and weaknesses, both the opportunities and challenges before this concept I'm going to talk about. Now, before I do that, first thing that I would like to tackle will be the relevance of multiculturalism. We are doing a refresher course. We are all academicians, and we are studying certain nuances of marginalization, certain nuances of centrality, certain nuances of multiculturalism. Why? I would like to hazard a kind of a tentative answer by taking on board two concepts. One from marketing strategy studies, that is need recognition. The other from military defense studies, that is threat perception. Now, the fact that we are going to talk about marginalization, we are going to talk about multiculturalism for the entire course of this, entire duration of this refresher course, means that we consider it important. We need to discuss this. This recognition is very important. Then, on the other hand, there is also a threat perception. It is important, it is essential. At the same time, it is under threat. I am going to talk about why and how. Well, let us look at this term multiculturalism. The root word, the stem word is culture. There is an adjectival suffix, that is al, that is of or relating to. There is a prefix multi, that means many and different. When we talk about multi, it means both many and different. And then there is ism. Now we actually talk about isms all the time, day and night. Now what is an ism? I would like to define ism as a system of arguments that accepts and propagates the existence, the desirability, and or the dominance of a phenomenon or someone's opinions. Okay, so multiculturalism, based on this definition, may mean a system of arguments that accepts and propagates the existence, the reality of many cultures, different cultures, and the desirability of many cultures and different cultures. Now, in his book, Toward the Definition of Multiculturalism, C. Rossetto has defined multiculturalism not only as an awareness of cultural diversity, but also some kind of policy that tries to protect this cultural diversity. Okay. And Alice Cashmore has also told us that based on context, different contexts, multiculturalism may mean an ideology, a discourse, and it can be taken to the sphere of policies and practices. Okay. Now, if we really want to understand multiculturalism, we must talk about culture. Etymologically, the word culture contains the hint of tillage. And Larry A. Samovar and Richard E. Peter, in their book Intercultural Communications, has defined culture as the deposit of knowledge, experience, beliefs, values, attitudes, meanings, roles, hierarchies, religions, and by implication ethnicity, notions of time, spatial relationships, conception of the universe, and last but not least, material possessions and objects acquired by a community in the course of generations through individual or group strivings. Why is it important? Just look at these words. The components of culture according to Samovar and Porter. You see, they talk about knowledge, experience, beliefs, values, roles, attitudes. So obviously, conceivably all spheres of human existence, both individual and collective, get somehow affected and influenced by culture. Now, if I have a culture, individually, as a part of a community, then someone else may have a different culture. And the buzzword is not only to be aware of this difference, but also to respect the same, to value the same, and thereby come to some kind of a peaceful coexistence that has the only alternative, according to Jawaharlal Nehru, as co-destruction. So today, when certain forces, supremacist discourses, try to polarize population, try to stab plurality, multiculturalism can be the only safeguard against destruction. Today, we are going to talk about the various concepts and contexts. Let me first take up for discussion the contexts. In any discussion of multiculturalism, the context will be unity, diversity, unity and in diversity, diversity in unity, and the recognition of these two states as being different but overlapping. Why? Because the concepts are such that any understanding of our social interdependence, our political interdependence, can never do without not only an awareness of plurality, but also a respectful understanding of that plurality. What are the issues and what are the factors? When I was starting my deliberation today, I was deliberately mentioning two terms, center and margin. Along with that, I must talk about hierarchy and hegemony on the one hand, and equality and agency on the other. The nature of power is such that those in power, the powers that be, always try to marginalize the powerless ones and keep them in the margins. On the other hand, the powerless ones try to dismantle this center by dislocating it. How? Through agency, through solidarity. So, in order to make a conducive environment for progress, peace, and stability, multiculturalism becomes a very, very important means, both in the hand of polity and in the hands of society. Now, any discussion of multiculturalism is usually initiated either by politicians and political theorists or by sociologists and social thinkers. Obviously, we as students of literature, students of the humanities, students of the social sciences, because we have to deal with human beings, with societies, we take the cue from them. So, we have to take cognizance of another associated concept, that of identity. Now, if the etymological root of culture is in tillage, then the etymological root of identity is identitas, in sameness. In the words of Joseph Butler, the 18th century philosopher, identity is the confluence of the intrinsic features of an individual that she or he may or may not share with others. So, If multiculturalism has to contend with culture and many cultures, then it has to contend with identity and many identities. Sometimes conflicting identities, sometimes conflicting cultures. But saying that we cannot, for the sake of convenience, ignore another concept, that of cultural identity. In the words of John A. Looney, cultural identity stipulates that one can achieve the highest form of humanity only by accepting the traditional symbols, values, behaviors, relationships with some specified others who self-consciously consider themselves as part of a community. Otherwise, one may risk censor and judgment. So based on one's acceptance or rejection of traditional symbols, judgments, behaviors, values, and relationships, one may be accommodated or rejected. So, any discussion of multiculturalism cannot do without a discussion of difference. You see, there are certain factors. We often talk about political ideology. We often talk about discourses that are based on certain ideologies, maybe nationalist ideology, socialist ideology, and so on and so forth. We know what may happen if we insist upon a monocultural exclusive state. We have had very important lessons from the Second World War, from the Holocaust, from genocides throughout the world, in the erstwhile Yugoslavia, in Rwanda, in Indonesia, and so on and so forth. So, in order to ward off such disasters, we have to talk about multiculturalism. We have to practice multiculturalism. Now, since you have listened to 3 or 4 lectures already, you may have already heard such words as the melting pot, the salad bowl, the mosaic. You know, basically these are associated with the two ways of multicultural cohesion, either imposed upon from above by the state or arrived at from below by the constituent groups. If it is it is assimilationist, it will be like melting pot. In the case of USA, you know, that is the case. If it is about a comprehensive amalgamation of difference, it can be mosaic, a cultural mosaic that has been practiced by a state like Canada, whereby, Justin Trudeau had told us that Canada has learned to be strong, not in spite of our differences, but because of them. Somewhere in between comes the concept of the salad bowl. Half of this and half of that. But a large-scale national survey in 2008 has pointed out that salad bowl is basically a conceptual non-starter, because when practiced, it has led to certain very debilitating disadvantages for the communities that have been forced to abide by this model. Since we are going to talk about policies, there are officially multicultural states like Canada, Australia, and Sweden. I call them CAS. And as teachers of colleges and universities, we are associated with that, aware of that. Now, there are unofficially multicultural countries. I call them none, NUN. For example, there is New Zealand, there is the Netherlands, and also the United Kingdom. There are other countries like India and the United States that, though not officially multicultural, they have promulgated, implemented certain social norms and rules and laws that are strongly flavored with multiculturalist tendencies. Now, if you look at Europe, the policy of multiculturalism is basically geared towards the incoming population. For example, the refugees and the immigrants. If we look at the Latin American countries, for example, they are aware of the multicultural needs and rights of the indigenous peoples that have been threatened, that have been thwarted over the years and centuries. In United States of America, we'll see that mostly multiculturalism is selective, whereby the racial disadvantages of the African Americans have been taken care of to some extent, but not wholly, and I will come back to it when I discuss a literary work by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, that is Americana. But they are not so very interested. I am talking about the United States administration, to take into cognizance the rights of the indigenous peoples. In the case of Canada, for example, it is a bit different. It is more comprehensive. And there, in spite of the reluctance of certain sections of the Canadian society, for example, the Quebecians and the Aborigines, multicultural policies have been implemented, encompassing everyone. In the most populist country of Africa, that means Nigeria, there are at least 250 ethnic groups, the chief among whom are the Igbo, the Hausas, and the Yoruba. So obviously, any kind of multicultural policies implemented by the stronger communities, the stronger ethnic groups often ignore, overlook, or deliberately silence the needs and peculiarities in condition of others, like the Ogoni. You know, if you look at the Ogoni people, you will see that Ken Saro-Wiwa had to fight a lone battle and had to lose his life to the bargain. An environmental activist, a community right activist. This actually brings us back to a very important debate that had beset the multicultural field of inquiry in the 1970s and 80s. Yes, I am talking about the liberal communitarian debate. What is the basic problem? The liberal side wanted to be progressive, holier than thou, and give credence to everybody and their needs without understanding. On the other hand, the communitarian side, they believed in community consolidations. They believed in community assertiveness and community pride. What multiculturalism as a conceptual domain did to us was to make us aware and was to make us respect the difference of the different peoples. Okay. Now, in the 21st century, societies and polities have become and remained pluralist. Why? Because over the millennia, nomadicity, intermarriages, and last but not least, various socio-economic evolutionary phenomena have meant that racial and then therefore cultural purity has been an elusive and an illusory concept. And that is why we have seen the simultaneous rise of two kinds of tendencies. One of community consolidation, another of nationalist centralization in the multicultural media of those countries that have mixed populations. And most of the countries on this globe are multicultural, composed as they are of different nations, different ethnicities. So what are the issues? What are the factors? The issues and factors can be cultural, ethnic, and national. They can also pit us against such considerations as gender and sexuality, ethnicity and nationality, age and health, and such other orientations. You see, so far as the state systems are concerned, the political systems are concerned, multiculturalism has had to contend with the various struggles between socialism and capitalism, between fundamentalism and interfaith, between theocracies and secular states, between welfare states that in most cases are basically managerial, therapeutic, and populist states and uprisings. We are aware of Shadbagh, we are aware of the Arab Spring, and so on and so on. But at the same time, in any over political and politicized discussion of multiculturalism, we may lose sight of such considerations as gender and sexuality. You think about the LGBTQIA plus considerations. You think about feminism. Similarly, you think about race, caste, religion, physical features that constitute difference in the social sphere, and that often lead to typecasting and prejudices, and that lead to supremacism, militarism, and all kinds of intolerance and lack of understanding. So we have to understand multiculturalism against the backdrop of this. And that is why multiculturalism has gone hand in hand with subnationalism in many countries. Thereby, whereas nationalism leaves a national community to hanker after territorial rights and sovereignty, subnationalism usually doesn't have any territorial ambition or separatist tendencies. In lieu of that, it has got community pride and the demand for recognition, some kind of ashmita. Eclecticism and enrichment of various communities in their cultures, in the community wherewithal to progress, like education, like healthcare, it has often led to community assertiveness. But at the same time, the state has also tried to consolidate its hold on power through centralization and surveillance, through such symbols as the national flag or the national anthem, such sentiments as customs, as land, as language, such narratives as myth and history, and such demographic consideration as migration and settlement. Migration outward bound and settlement inward bound. You think about Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, for example, has been a land with a dominant majority, that is Sinhala, and a sizable minority, that is Tamils. And this has led to conflict. Why? Because when they have coexisted and clashed for resources, the majority has often thought the minority as a drain on resources, and the minority on the other hand has thought of the majority as exclusionary. Even though the minorities contribute to the creation of wealth of nation, they have been denied political representation. Similar has been the case of Bangladesh, for example. Look at it. You know, when India won her independence, there was partition. And Pakistan was created on religious lines. But then, the Pakistani government tried to homogenize without considering plurality as a feasible option. Thereby, the Bengalis of East Pakistan were not given adequate representation in politics, in the military, and even though the highest percentage of export came from the earnings came from East Pakistan, they were not given adequate percentage of the national wealth. That was not spent, and that led to the liberation struggle. So, in a way, Bengali culture was poo-pooed, and there was a drive at homogenization, and it backfired in the case of Pakistan and led to the creation of Bangladesh. You think about Sudan. It has been bifurcated along religious lines. Northern Sudan and Southern Sudan. So, the examples are many and varied all over the globe. Okay. What is the time? Do I have time? I hope I have time. Okay. Am I still audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, you see, now I come to a very, very tricky part of our discussion today. I am going to talk about the poetics and politics of representation. When we talk about representation, we often talk about representation as expression, literary or cultural. But before that, we have to think about representation as conception, that is internalization. We actually, before we express our opinions about difference, about diversity, we actually think about those things. We conceptualize those things. The difference and diversity is first conceptualized and then expressed. Oftentimes, we see that representation leads to typecasting, both positive and negative. Whenever we take the word, use the word typecasting, stereotyping, stereotypes, we often presume that it is negative. Yes, in most cases it is negative. Think about Orientalism by Edward Said, who has talked about that kind of stereotyping the East, the Orient. But there is also kind of positive stereotyping, typecasting, positive typecasting. For example, the English have often been called diligent, law-abiding, even though our experience as inhabitants of erstwhile colonies, British colonies, parts of the British Empire have not been so very rosy. So often there is also positive typecasting. We consider certain communities as being very dilkhola, very open-minded, very fun-loving. But if you look at the crime ratio of those places, those states of India, you will see that hate crimes, crimes because of property, they are sky high in such countries also. So any kind of typecasting may often be counterproductive. Why am I talking about this in course of my discussion of multiculturalism? Because multiculturalism promotes awareness and understanding about respect, but not a blind respect, but an aware respect. Respect of difference and diversity. You know, culturally speaking, we often go through such processes as enculturation, whereby we become aware of the surroundings as we acquire culture in the social sphere. So it is both active and passive. In any new situation, the cultural process that sets in is acculturation. So you actually adjust to new surroundings by learning and adjusting to newer cultures. You think about Friday, Man Friday in Robinson Crusoe. There is acculturation. But at the same time, there is also deculturation. So if one in a coercive environment is forced to learn and adjust to a particular culture and cultural milieu, often one's cultural antecedents are erased. So this is basically an active process. But then there is also transculturation, which in particular contexts become almost synonymous with neoculturation. Because in transculturation, constitutive cultures interact, interpenetrate, and influence one another, thereby not only transforming a new culture that is constituted by the contributory cultures, but becomes a new and different culture altogether. And this is important in any theorization of Dalit literature, Kotwal literature, feminist literature, gay and queer literature, lesbian literature. So any kind of celebratory or emancipatory literary venture, cultural venture has to be grounded in multicultural milieu and tendencies. Now, I am going to talk about certain cultural and literary manifestations, instantiations of this multicultural tendencies. First, I am talking about the national anthem of India, Jana Gana Mana Yati Nayake Jaya. You may say that we all know about it, so why are you discussing this? I'm discussing this because, think of the time, think about the situation when this song was written. Think about the pulls and pressures that were tearing India apart. And the adoption of this as national anthem was itself seriously ideologically baggaged. Think about another thing. For example, you see the national sobriquet of the Rainbow Nation. This term was coined by Archbishop Desmond Tutu after the end of the apartheid in the Republic of South Africa. Another thing was instituted, this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, chaired by, again, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The Rainbow Nation, all colors, all hues. And the optical allusion was very, very apt in that case. Think about a very interesting incident from the realm of sports. In 2004, during the Athens Olympics, the black British female athlete, Kelly Holmes, who bagged gold medals in two events, 800-meter run and 1500-meter run. After winning gold, while doing the lap of honor, the victory lap, she draped herself in the excuse me, the Union Jack. There was two messages, a double message. One was that the blacks belonged to Britain, and the other one was that Britain belonged to the blacks. So there was some kind of a restitution. If you look at the 1950s, take up a book like The Lonely Londoners by Sam Servan. You will see that even though they were given the political right of citizenship, they were socially excluded. They were lonely, even though they were in the metropolis. So Kelly Holmes made a very bold statement. I may again refer to the Canadian experiment of the post-national state. In 2017, for example, Justin Trudeau talked about this, opened their borders to immigrants, to refugees. They took in people from different countries and cultures. Their expertise, their experiences, all were utilized in the onward march of Canada. Now I will talk about certain literary examples. You think about an iconic book by Jawaharlal Nehru, The Discovery of India. The liberal, socialist kind of intellectual writing this book while in prison in the Ahmednagar fort from 1942 to 1945. This book was written in 1944, and think about it. Who were Nehru's collaborators? If there was Govinda Vallabh Pant, there was Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. If there was Narendra Deva, then there was also Asaf Ali. So, you know, in chapter 6 of this particular book, in chapter 5 and in chapter 8, Nehru deliberately talks about the mixed cultural heritage of India. But he never shuts his eyes to the constraints of this mixed cultural heritage. If there is a centripetal force working to keep things together, then there is also a centrifugal force of things falling apart, of center being unable to hold. That was also there. You think about another book, for example, yes, in the 1980s, Hanif Qureshi published an essay, The Rainbow Sign. You know, the title and the epigraph for this essay was taken from a collection of essays, 2 essays by James Baldwin, the African American intellectual and writer. No, in this particular essay, he talks about the life of the Pakistani British migrant diasporic population in Britain during the Thatcher years. Race, religion, sexual orientation, that is homosexuality, all these things, and how they are responded to positively or negatively by the majority, by the national imaginary, has been talked about in this particular. And here I may refer you to another book, you know, that is Cartography by Kamila Samshu, the Pakistani novelist. In this particular novel, he talks about life in America, life in England, life in Pakistan, about situations during the first partition of 1947 and the second and final partition of 1971, and how cartography remains only, to borrow a phrase from Amitabh Ghosh, drawn in and through shadow lines, is pointed out by obviously Kamila Samshu. The next book that I may discuss in some detail will be Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's book, Americana. Those of you who have read this book may know that the setting of this novel varies. Sometimes it is in Nigeria, sometimes in America, sometimes in Britain. As most of the characters, some of the characters, or one of the characters visit and stay in particular places. And how they are treated in such settings is described in great detail by Aditya. If on the one hand there is the cultural tension, the political and territorial tension of Nigeria being described by the life of the general Ovinje's mother and other characters. If the life in Africa is reminisced about by the hairdressers of Mariama African hairdressing saloon, people like Mariama herself and Aisha and others, then Ifemelu's many experiences in America is also very instructive. Thereby you will see that, a character like Blaine, who is an American black, often fails to understand Ifemelu, who is a non-American black, because they have had different kind of pasts. The slavery encountered, experienced and endured by the American blacks has given them sometimes a heritage of great deal of anger, annoyance. Then it has also given them a raw deal in the so-called land of promise, the land of the sun. As Fawzia Karimi calls America, in above us the Milky Way, an illuminated alphabet. So we also see how Ovinje, as an African black, impoverished African black, a kind of an asylum seeker, is ill-treated and literally deported from the United Kingdom, but then accepted, not only accepted, but courted by the British officials when he becomes a somebody in Nigeria. So we also see how certain cultural differences are relatively well tolerated. For example, the lesbian relationship between Paula and Marcia in Americana. But then certain other counts of difference are not so well treated, are not so well accepted. So this is why at the fag end, towards the fag end of my discussion, I'd like to point out certain remedies that experts have prescribed. For example, the change in the curricula, introduction of certain subjects and courses. Yes, these things are being done, but being done in a very half-hearted way. We are having courses on partition, we are having courses on women's writing, we are having courses on Dalit literature, but we are not having adequate representation of certain things like folkloristics that may be very important in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilingual, multicultural background. And there has to be a serious revaluation of history and historiography. Otherwise, supremacist discourses and hegemonic forces may try to reshape the past, influence our present, and jeopardize our future. With this, I come to the end of my discussion. Questions and comments are all welcome. Just one problem. Please don't write anything in the chat box. Please ask your questions, because I have a problem with my eyesight. I can't read from the chat box. Yes,
Hello?
please.
Hello, I'm Jishnu Dasgupta from Srirampur College. Just really enjoyed the talk, but just one or two clarifications. One is that something that is perhaps also has to go into our understanding of multiculturalism, and I'm particularly thinking of the Rwanda case, where I think it has been shown that the Hutu Tutsis, whom we normally think of as expressions of primordial identities, they were also very much built on class differences. And that was almost a colonial construct. And prior to the colonial period, Rwandan, in my earlier profession, I happened to know some people who worked with the Rwandan Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is modeled on the South African one, and of course was a spectacular failure. Um, so their work showed that actually prior to the colonial period, the Hutu-Tutsi divide was not at all tribal. It was merely about who holds property and who does not. So ethnic identities are also constructed over time, and this is something we also have to be aware of. For instance, again, I'm thinking of the Indian context, which is brought up so beautifully through Nehru's own experience and all. Again, I'm thinking of, say, how Gyan Pandey has shown how communalism, the entire discourse was sort of constructed in the 19th century by the colonial state in what was then the United Provinces. Or in Bengal, Rafiuddin Ahmed's work, which has shown that how the colonial state was extremely scared when, during the census, it showed up that a large number of people from rural Bengal entered Hindu Musalman as their religious category. So the issue of governmentality in actually creating these identities and these divides, governance, I know governmentality is slightly different, but I also think governmentality speaks to it. How these colonial governmental attitudes also created these differences, how the census, for instance, in India, created certain categories which then became ossified, which were perhaps not so ossified earlier, except for maybe the very top and the very bottom in terms of caste. I think that also has to be taken into account when we are thinking of multiculturalism and the threats to it. Thank you.
See, one thing is there. You know, when I was talking about the center margin dichotomy, you see, marginality is created and perpetuated on the basis of certain factors. Ethnicity is one of them, class is another. And there are other issues also. So, my intention was never to downplay the importance of class. That is there. That has been there. But over importance of class may also blind us to such other hierarchies, social hierarchies as caste and ethnicity. So, in the case of Rwanda, You know, obviously, marginality is aggravated by the vicious circle. That is why today intersectionality has become so important a field of study that actually tries to focus on the points of intersection between different marginalizing forces and factors. Thank you for your comment.
So I have a question. My question is theoretical, although I think that it has a bearing on practice, including political and cultural intervention. You spoke about the politics and poetics of representation, implying, if I'm not mistaken, also politics premise on recognition and the dialectic of identity and difference. Now, it seems to me that representation is always already more of a refraction rather than a reflection, a simple reflection first. Second, that any mode of representation is always already mediated by and saturated by within power structure, power relations. There is a structure of domination. That is one thing. Second point is that we know that there is a fundamental sense in which every representation is a misrepresentation. We know that Harold Bloom tells us that every reading is a misreading. The question is whether it is a weak or a strong. That is creative misreading, and we know that post-structuralist thinkers like Lacan tells us that every recognition, including as it does cognition, is also a misrecognition, involving both self and other, which entails a certain form of narcissistic projection where love and hate can easily switch, reverse their poles. So, given this, what would you say about the very viability of a politics of difference constructed on the possibility or otherwise of representation?
Now, if I am not mistaken, there was an argumentative tussle between Hillis Miller and who was there? About this thing. The whole question of post-structural problematization and provisionalization of categories. The thing is, in any social discourse, even though we cannot totally ignore the mediated nature of discourses, we have to deprovisionalize meaning to certain extent. Otherwise, no discussion can be possible. So if we just go on talking about this already already aphoria, then what will happen? We will come to nowhere. So provisionalization has been there. Mediation has been there. It is nothing new. Even though in the 20th century, theorists and theories have tried to take cognizance of this with great rigor. But any discussion of multiculturalism has to be premised upon at least a provisional understanding of certain phenomena as facts. Otherwise, this refraction, this route will take us nowhere. Yes, any other question? Or comment?
No more questions, sir. Your presentation, your television was so much critically explained. So I have no question anymore. Thank you, sir.
Pleasure was mine.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Uh, Sir, good afternoon. Devaditya
Okay.
here. Thank you for your very engaging discussion. I was wondering if you could share your thoughts on the on how the, well, I would like to call it overuse of technology is creating an impact on multiculturalism, or what I would like to say, interactions between different cultures. If you could share your thoughts on that, sir.
Okay, please explain yourself. Elaborate upon what you really want to mean by the overuse of technology.
Well, at present, especially after the pandemic, I think we have all experienced a boom of use of technology, and
For example, this online platform.
yes, yes,
Okay,
yes,
okay, go on.
I had that in mind, and well, I can see that we are having experience, we are having glimpses of other cultures by way of memes, TikTok videos, and whatnot through the social media platforms. I would say it is being more frequent than what it used to be when I was a teenager. So I just had that in mind, that how this boom of using technology is going to create an impact on this issue of cultural interaction, or whether at all it would lead to a significant phase in multiculturalism.
Devaditya, my question is this boom in technological use something new?
Not at
It
all,
has
sir.
been there. Let me finish, please. You know, this has been there. When we were kids, there was radio. There was not only Akashvani, there was Deutsche Welle Cologne, there was Voice of Russia World Service, there was Radio Moscow, there was this thing, Voice of America, BBC, Radio Pakistan, Radio Bangladesh, now it is called Bangladesh Betar, and so on and so forth. So culture was glimpsed, even though not visually. You think about it. You think about the 19th century. You think about the telegraph. You think about the railway, about the trains. So technology has throughout down the ages been there. You know, the whole thing changed at about say in the 80s and 90s. Why? Because then television came, audio visual medium came, and you think about the two channels of Doordarshan, and then this proliferation of cable television. Think about that. Don't you think that actually opened our eyes to different cultures as well? Because there, in earlier days, there was radio, there was song, there was drama, there was other uh, audio content. But now, with cable television, the entire thing changed. And if you wanted, you could catch programs from across the border. And then you think about the computer, the internet. It started long before the pandemic. The thing is, the pandemic has done is given us time and also taken other options, because you have to stay at home, because you cannot meet people socially, physically. And the virtual meetings are the only possible gateways, and thereby our reliance on, our use of such content has increased. But my humble submission would be to point out that that has been there down the ages. Only the change has been in frequency to some extent, and in the change of character. The character, the way we look at these things. Because from content reception, some kind of shift has taken place to content generation. As you were talking about TikTok videos.
Yes, sir. I actually had these in mind, and I really thank you for the response. Uh, Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, in the beginning of your lecture, you talked about essentialism. So, can you clarify that it's just
No, 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 I
using?
didn't talk about essentialism. I said that it was, when I was talking about need recognition, I said that multiculturalism is perceived today as something that is essential, not essentialism. Got my point? I hope you have.
Yes, sir. Yes. Okay,
Okay. So I was not
okay,
talking
sir.
about essentialism.
Okay, sir.
Yes. Okay. If there are no other questions, then I can actually wind up this by thanking you for your patience and certain penetrating questions and comments. I loved the whole experience, and I have tried to make my presentation accessible to a mixed audience, because I was given to understand by the organizers that the college teachers and university teachers participating in this program have come from different disciplines. So I hope I have been able to open certain avenues in your discussion and thinking of multiculturalism as a viable option. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So I would like to ask the organizers, can I quit now? Professor Waterbell, can I quit now?
Probably
Is
the
there anyone
organizers are
from
not
HLC?
there. Probably they are not there, sir.
Okay, I am tweeting all the same. I hope we had met as strangers, but we are parting as friends. Thank you.